Everyone, how's it going? So I'm here for my first ShakeTube video. ShakeTube is a 4-week read-along of some Shakespeare plays that I, Steve Donahue, and Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse are hosting, and for which Kelly of Books I'm Not Reading is the official cheerleader. And so Jason, Steve, and I are all doing different sets of plays, and my first set of plays for this first week was the two parts of Henry IV. So it's really two plays, but it's sort of one overarching story. And so the two parts of Henry IV, they are called Henry IV, and they aren't really about Henry IV that much. He only appears a few times throughout the plays, at least relative to his son, Prince Hal, who is crowned as King Henry V at the end of the second part, and Sir John Falstaff, who is the character that everyone wants to talk about. And so the first part, at the beginning of the first part of Henry IV, Henry IV has just become king. His position is still a bit precarious. What happens is Hotspur, who is one of the noblemen who helped to put Henry IV on the throne when he rebelled against Richard II, feels slighted by Henry IV. And so Hotspur revolts and gathers an army of Welshmen and others from among his allies, and leads this revolt against Henry IV. And the first part is culminates in this large battle where Henry IV and his son Prince Hal and Sir John Falstaff, to an extent, defeat this revolt, and Hotspur is killed. And then the second part of Henry IV is kind of just a continuation of that same revolt by the Archbishop of York, among others, and the defeat of that revolt, not by a battle, but by a trick played by Prince Hal's brother, Prince John. So that is the sort of skeleton of the plot of these plays. You can also see it as sort of a coming-of-age story of Prince Hal, who's crowned as King Henry V at the end of Part 2. And basically his being pushed and pulled by different forces in his life, by the forces of his father, Henry IV, and of people like Hotspur, who is this sort of larger-than-life warrior figure who styles himself sort of like warriors from myth, and to John Falstaff, who is sort of a hedonistic knight, who is basically the character that I want to talk about. And so I'm just going to talk about John Falstaff. There are a lot of characters you can talk about. Marjorie Garber talks about most of the major characters in these plays at length. And I hope that everyone will talk about the other characters in the comments if they want to, but I really just want to talk about Falstaff. And so just to start with, I read the two parts of Henry IV last year for the first time, and I really came away not really being able to see what all the fuss was about, frankly. I didn't really connect with Falstaff very much. I wanted to, because Harold Bloom writes quite eloquently about him, and Harold Bloom clearly is incredibly passionate about Falstaff as a character. But I just could not connect with him, and it was strange. I just, I don't know, I thought maybe he's just not a character who connects with me personally, or something, or my main suspicion was that I read the plays too fast. And in retrospect, I think that's what happened. But this time, needless to say, I think you can see I'm leading up to this, I really fell in love with Falstaff. He is wonderful. However, I have tried to record this video a few other times, and I've had a really hard time articulating my thoughts without writing them down. So I actually have a little script to read from for you all. I hope it's not too artificial, but I'm just going to give you my thoughts about Falstaff in the form of what I've written, rather than giving it on the fly, sort of like I usually do. Falstaff is irreverent toward basically everyone and everything he comes across. He hates any kind of tyranny or authority, secular or religious. He's nihilistic in a much more life-affirming way than someone like Hamlet, using his unbelief in anything and everything as a way for liberation, as a way to cry out, "Give me life," because this life is all he has, and he would like to enjoy it. As he says in Act 2, Scene 4, "If sack and sugar be a fault, God help the wicked. If to be old and merry be a sin, then many an old host that I know is damned. If to be fat be to be hated, then Pharaoh's lean kine are to be loved. No, my good lord, banish Peto, banish Bardolph, banish Poins, but for sweet Jack Falstaff, kind Jack Falstaff, true Jack Falstaff, valiant Jack Falstaff, and therefore more valiant, being as he is old Jack Falstaff. Banish not him thy Harry's company, banish not him thy Harry's company, banish plump jaw Jack, and banish all the world. And again, in Act 5, Scene 1, he derides the idea of honor, and through it all creeds and authorities that deign to regulate how one should live one's life. What is honor? A word. What is in that word honor? What is that honor? Air. A trim reckoning. Who hath it? He that died a Wednesday. Doth he feel it? No. Doth he hear it? No. 'Tis insensible then? Yea, to the dead. But will it not live with the living? No. Why? Detraction will not suffer it. Therefore I'll none of it. Honor is a mere scutcheon. And so ends my catechism. Now, as Marjorie Garber points out, this approach to life is attractive, clearly, given all the fans that Jack Falstaff has. But it is often untenable in the face of the events of the real world. It's part of the reason that in order to become king, Hal must ultimately reject Falstaff. Because in order to be king of a cold realm full of scheming Machiavellians, in order to live in a world of politics, he needs the very authority that Falstaff so emphatically rejects. Falstaff is an everyman's character stuck in a world with people who would aspire to be larger than life. Whether it be Hotspur, who would style himself like the classical heroes of the Trojan Wars, or Prince John, who tricks the rebels in Part 2 into allowing themselves to be arrested through deception, or Prince Hal himself, who will use much of what he's learned from Falstaff to gain a glorious but ultimately useless victory at Agincourt in Henry V. Thus, Falstaff cannot survive in this world. In that way, he's an immensely tragicomic character, and for me, the rejection scene at the end of Part 2 is possibly the most devastating scene in all of Shakespeare outside of King Lear. So that basically sums up my thoughts on Falstaff as they stand right now. I'm sure I will reread these in the future, and my thoughts will change with time. I can now really see why he's such an attractive character, and yeah, I really enjoyed Part 1. Part 2, I lost a lot of interest. A lot of Part 2 felt like sort of filler. The Falstaff of Part 2 is a very elegiac character. Marjorie Garber kind of points out how, you know, his big speech in Part 2 is, rather than about honor, the one that I quoted, is about alcohol, basically, and how wonderful alcohol is. But that scene, that rejection scene, is really just incredibly devastating. And I think it's even more devastating because throughout that play, you can kind of see that Falstaff is sort of in decline. There are references made everywhere in Part 2 to his aging, decrepitude, his impending death, which happens off-screen in Henry V. And yeah, so I think now I can see why Falstaff is one of the greatest creations in literature, and yeah. So those are my thoughts. I wish I could have talked about everyone else, but I tried to talk about everything I wanted to talk about in previous attempts to record this version, and it just was not working out. My thoughts were defying coherence. So you're unfortunately only going to be able to hear me talk about Falstaff. But yeah, I want to hear everyone's thoughts about Falstaff and everyone else in these two plays. And I will see you all in other ShakeTube videos and in my own next ShakeTube video next week. Bye, guys.